So we're all set. I warmly welcome you, everybody, to this event of the LSE German Society. We hope that wherever you currently find yourself in the world, you have already been able to attend a number of events and will continue to do so in the next few days. We've had a great day already, and we are very happy to now turn our attention to the next event, which will be on what is arguably Germany's most important industry, the German automotive industry. We are delighted to have Hiltrud Werner, a member of the Board of Management at Volkswagen, Kames, Managing Director and Head of Investment Banking of JP Morgan in Germany, and Martin Kors, Managing Director of the German Association of the Automotive Industry for this event. So this will be an interesting discussion, I can promise you that. And with that, we're all set. And I'm handing over to our chair for this event, who is Stefan Menzel, automotive correspondent at the Handelsblatt. So over to you, Mr. Menzel.
Yeah, hello everybody, and warm welcome here from Düsseldorf in Germany. Unfortunately, we can't meet in Berlin, but maybe next year, it should be possible again. Hopefully, Corona, we will manage it all over Europe, and we'll have some more progress throughout the next weeks and months. Yeah, our topics, the future of the German automotive industry. And as Mr. Scherer already mentioned, we have very interesting guests today to talk about this particular topic. What's going on about the German, let's say the heart of the German industry, or the heart of the German economy. I start to present you Mrs. Hiltrud Werner. She's a member of the Board of Management of the Volkswagen AG. She's responsible for integrity and legal affairs. And maybe what's quite interesting about that, this position is relatively new in the Board of Management of Volkswagen AG, more or less introduced at the end of 2015. Easy to explain, after the diesel scandal, this particular position was implemented at Volkswagen. Before that, it was on a lower level, but it was really implemented in the Board of Management. As everybody easily can understand, Volkswagen was much more focusing on this particular topic. On the other hand, we've got Martin Kors. He's one of the managing directors of the Verband der Automobilindustrie. This is one of the most influential associations, industry associations in Germany, similar or an equivalent to the British SMMT, but with quite a difference, because we have the big names on the German side. It's Volkswagen and Daimler and BMW. And as you can easily imagine, because it's so important for the German industry, or for Germany as a whole, the association, the VDA, is quite influential in Berlin on governments and so on, government issues. And I think Martin Kors can tell us a few interesting things about the perspective from the association of all manufacturers. That not only includes the car producers, also the suppliers like Bosch and Continental. They're also a member of the VDA. Last but not least, Christian Kames. He's vice president working for JP Morgan, and he's responsible for investment banking in the so-called DACH region, DACH, Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Literally translated into English, it means roof. It's the roof for the German-speaking countries. And what he's doing, mergers and acquisitions is part of his job. And throughout the last years, he was very much also focusing on the automotive industry. When you're doing such a job for a bank or a branch of bank located in Germany, the automotive industry is quite important. And just one sentence to me. My name is Stefan Mansell. I'm automotive correspondent for the German financial daily Handelsblatt. I think because it's more some kind of a German focus here, mostly everybody knows it, Handelsblatt, but just one explanation for the British viewers. Handelsblatt is the German equivalent to the Financial Times. Okay, we're a lot smaller, but because our language is a lot smaller, but we are working on that. Okay. So we start with some presentations, and ladies first, Mrs. Werner, it's up to you. Bitte schön.
Thank you very much for the very warm welcome. And as we say, if you do something for the second time, it's a repetition. If you do something for the third time, it already becomes a tradition. This is my third participation in the German Symposium, and I feel honored that you invited me again. I would like to say a few words about where we stand at the moment at the automotive industry. And quite frankly, this morning I was really happy that I didn't spend the morning sitting in the plane, flying to London, because that gave me the opportunity also to listen into some of your other panels and speakers. And I saw that we are totally in line with what's going on in the industry, and there were very impressive speeches also by different participants, from Frau Kipping to Mr. Bodo Müller from BASF, and I will refer to that later on. But next slide, please. Let's just talk about the world as it is today. The world is spinning faster and faster, and we all know that what is valid today could be outdated tomorrow. And we just experienced it also with COVID-19. Our life is dominated by a virus. We are experiencing things that were a year ago unthinkable. And there's a lot that teaches us that old certainties do no longer apply. And it also shows us that there is a triumph of new technologies, and there's a boost into digitization just because we have to work in a new way together. For us in the automotive industry, it's clear that the current developments have dramatic consequences. And of course, we are not the only industry that is facing transformation and disruption. But when the car is going digital, and I don't have to explain that, you can read it almost in every message from our CEO that he speaks about the car as a mobile device. But it's not only our product, it is the whole value chain that is affected by all the changes in the industrial landscape around us. And when we talk about the industrial landscape, automatically there is a huge influence also by politics and also by legislation. And when we look a little bit further into the world and take China, for example, I don't know who of you has listened to the speech last week from Xi Jinping at the World Economic Forum, which was live streamed also. You can see that China is pumping billions into the digital industry and also into the battery sector, which is important for the automotive industry, and that the progress that is made in China is impressive, but it's also frightening for some of us. We feel our dependencies in the world even more. And when you look at the Volkswagen Group, then you see that almost half of our business is in China. And where would we be if the rules of the game change suddenly? And you also see that there are certain tangible conflicts of interest. Do we take every business deal that we could make? Do we draw a line somewhere? How do we integrate into the society there? What are the questions that people quite rightly ask us about it? And how global are we really in the future? And how is the expectation of the society changing? And that means the questions are getting louder and louder, that we do not only produce good cars, but also that we contribute to the common good of the society. And that means that in parts, we have to rethink our company, not only the products, also our attitude, how we make plans, the ethics around this. And we have to ask ourselves also, what if something changes? I have worked with a great team of internal experts in our company to do just that. We published an ebook, which you can also download from the Investors Relations website from Volkswagen Group, about the futures of ethics 2040. We have looked into different scenarios, and I can only resonate what Mr. Brudermüller said in his speech. The time to make the right decisions is now. It's not in the future. And the decisions that we are making now will really decide how we will live in 2040. We have worked on different scenarios how this future could look like. Is it a puzzled world, or is it green evolution, where we all in the world have understood that there is no planet B, and that we all become climate activists and also change mobility around these new topics? Or is it a world of trauma control, where people react to the current pandemic and other crises? Or is it a scenario that we called Innovatia, where China takes the lead, and we have to look to apply other regulations to our products than we are used to? Or the fifth scenario we looked at, we call it structural decay. Let's look into innovation for a little bit deeper. Maybe next slide, please. And that would mean that we could see in such a scenario that the European Union and the United States of America have maybe lost their dominant position, and China becomes the powerhouse for a global economy. Also, other developments could impact Europe. Maybe China is successful with projects like the New Silk Road, and the economic balance will shift towards China. That would mean that a strong economic area will emerge from that region. That would also mean that there could be rapid technological progress, especially in the fields of artificial intelligence and autonomous driving. But free, less heavily subsidized market economies might not keep the pace that's coming from that region. And it would also mean that we become even more dependent from that region. In the consequence, there could be a dramatic change for our company as well. Chinese requirements and Chinese legislation becomes extremely important. Competition would be distorted. Hardly any independent company would be able to compete against heavily subsidized large Chinese companies. And a global climate policy would be largely subordinated to economic interests. Of course, all of that is an exaggerated description, but depending on the decisions that are made in this world in the next few months, and I don't know how short the time is, hopefully a little more, this scenario could be quite realistic. And the question for a company like Volkswagen is, what are we going to do about it? What are our considerations? Our investors have a right to know not only about the line of our products, but also how we forecast the legislation and the ethical decisions that are the fundamentals for our decisions. And from my point of view, the world is still open. Thinking in scenarios is very good because it gives us the opportunity to think far more into the future, not just forecasting the next 5 to 10 years. And I think if we see the good and the bad in different scenarios and take actions to drive towards a scenario that suits the world best, it's not too late. Thank you, and back to you, Mr. Menzel.
Sorry for that. Oops. Sorry for that once again. No, China is, I think, quite an important topic. We'll come to back to that later on. Next turn in our row of presentations is for Martin Kors from the VDA. And I guess we might hear some similar things because it's the industry, the automotive industry. There are a lot of parallels between Volkswagen and the whole industry, or the industry as a whole. So Martin Kors, it's up to you. It's your turn. Please go ahead.
So thank you very much, Mr. Menzel. You can hear me, yeah? It works? Everything is fine. Okay. So thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to this session. Other than Mrs. Werner, it's the first time for me, and I'm very proud to be part of this conference, this 1-hour conference now. And I was asked if I could give a view on the future of automotive industry. Is the German car industry ready for tomorrow from the VDA perspective? And as Mr. Menzel mentioned, the German Association, one word on this, is an association where not only the big manufacturers are organized, but also the suppliers, and not only the big ones like Bosch and Continental, but lots of the small and medium-sized suppliers which are under the roof of the VDA, and the body and trailer manufacturers. And that is quite important to know, because different to, for example, the associations on a European level that you find in Brussels, for example, there you have 3 different associations focusing on these special companies. And within the VDA, everything is under one roof, actually. And this gives also, if we find a position on certain things, it gives a very strong voice from the VDA to the public in Germany, to the politicians in Germany, but also into Brussels. Mrs. Werner, she had very futuristic charts in her presentation, looking like what the future could look like in 2050, for example. If you look at the slide itself, it's somewhat the same. If you look at the back of my screen, this is the IAA. The VDA is not only special about their membership, it's also special about we are the organizer of the IAA, which is one of the biggest motor shows actually in the world. And this motor show is also in a fundamental change, and I will also explain a little bit on that. So the key topics I want to focus on very shortly only is, first of all, we are in a crisis we never experienced before. Many say it's the worst crisis since the Second World War, all over the world. A crisis and the markets due to COVID-19 are going down. And this needs actually a never experienced transformation of our industry. And I want to shortly focus on that as well. There's a fundamental change of mobility that we experience. And many of the CEOs say, within the next 15 years, we will experience more change than we experienced the last 100 years. And I want to focus a little bit on the IAA 21, which is not a car show anymore, which should be a mobility platform. And I will focus on that also a little bit. If we go on to the next slide, don't worry, not very, I don't want to bother you with a lot of figures, only one slide on that. What you see here is actually the passenger car registration within the world. And you see, for example, in 2017, we had nearly 85 million cars that were registered all around the world. And you see, for example, from 2009 to 2017, there was growth, growth, and growth. The key growth driver, of course, is China. It is the biggest market already, and there is still opportunity for further growing because the economy is not there where it wants to be in the future. So there is still potential for further growth. What we realized in 2018, 2019 already is a short decline, but that was actually more or less a normal cycle. And then the crisis hits us, then COVID-19 came. And here you see in 2020, the decrease we actually experienced. We thought we are coming out in 2020 somewhere around 80 million cars, somehow like 2019. We came out at 68 million cars. That is 12 million cars less than we forecasted actually at the beginning of last year. And 12 million cars, in order to understand that, because many people don't understand it and they don't know is that a lot or not, that is similar to not one car in West Europe. The whole Western Europe market is around 13 million cars. And so Corona actually resulted in the loss of one big market, and that has to be carried by the OEMs and the suppliers. And if we go to the next slide, if we know that we are in one of the biggest transformation processes and we are hit by a crisis, what does a transformation process mean? It means investment, investment, investment. And if you are in a situation, especially for small and medium companies, for small and medium-sized companies, if they need to invest as they never experienced in their life because of the changes in the car industry, and there is no money coming in, how can they survive? And that is the big problem actually we face. There are big problems going on, of course, for the OEMs and the big suppliers, but they are very big and they can survive for a longer period than especially small and medium-sized companies can do. And what we did as an association is trying to help them and to focus the politicians on the situation, especially also on small and medium-sized companies. If we go to the next slide and we see what kind of transformation process we are challenging, then it is we have to face the challenges which are outside, and that are the challenges, everybody knows them: urbanization, mega cities. If we talk about mega cities, for example, we don't have any mega city in Germany. I mean, Berlin, I'm living in Berlin, is the biggest city in Germany with 3.6 million inhabitants. If you compare that to Chinese cities or to city like Mexico City or like Indian cities, there are totally different challenges these mega cities facing compared to the challenges we are facing here in Germany. The climate change, of course, the environmental protection, global competition, new players coming into the market, coming from China, coming from the United States, especially from California, entering into the different markets. The traffic safety, the increasing traffic, the population growth, all these challenges have to be faced. And of course, there are areas all the OEMs and the suppliers are working on, and that are alternative powertrains, automation, connectivity, and new services. The key drivers actually are going into alternative powertrains and finding solution of how we can get CO2 neutral till 2050. We want to meet the climate, the Paris Agreement, and that is the clear commitment of the German automotive industry to meet these targets. And another key change of the competition also is how we deal as a traditional industry with the digitization we are facing. Mrs. Werner mentioned it, the key challenge of getting away from a traditional car manufacturer into a tech player where software plays a key role in order to meet the future challenges. If we go to the next slide, I just want to focus on one issue, because we as a German industry are convinced electrification is of utmost importance, but there are other solutions as well, and we need to focus on other solutions as well. I only want to mention, for example, synthetic fuels. If you look at the combustion engine itself is not the problem. It is always the question, what kind of energy is it using? The same with the electric car, for example. The electric car in itself is not the solution. There has to be renewable energy going with it, with the electric car, in order to make it really CO2 neutral. So the challenge we are facing worldwide is we have to provide the technology, the mobility technology, and at the same time, we have to look at the energy, where the energy is coming from. Are we as a German industry in a good position? The next slide, we think we are in a good position. We are a very traditional industry, but at the same time, innovation, innovation, innovation is the key success driver for us. And the German car industry, supplier as well as manufacturers, we are the worldwide leading research and development investors, actually. If you look at what suppliers and manufacturers are spending worldwide, not only in Germany, but worldwide, suppliers and manufacturers as well, it's more than 40 billion euro per year. And the next big a country, like car country, where suppliers and manufacturers that you can compare, for example, is Japan, with below 30. And so this gives us a strong convince, or we are strongly convinced that the research and development will result into innovations that we need for the future. We are broadly positioned. The German car industry was always, like we say, a tent fighter. It is not only focusing on one technology, but we have a broadly positioned industry itself. We are not only selling small cars, but we are selling small cars and large cars. We are not selling only electric cars, but we are also focusing on other technologies. So the broadly positioned industry is for us a key success driver for the future as well. What also gives us a very strong position, we are convinced, is the close interdependence of suppliers and manufacturers. Also within the VDA, in our association, we have very strong medium-sized companies. We call them hidden champions. Many of them are not known by the public actually in the world, because they are so specialized. And all these companies, of course, they have to transform as well, but they are very, very special in their area. And in Germany, we have a close interlinking industry, the industry with politics and social partners. We are very, very strong. If we go into one area, politics, industry, and the social partners are always trying to push at one end and not at different ends. Let me focus at the very end also a little bit on the IAA, or maybe one point where we have to get better in our industry is we have to speed up. Because we see that in China, there is sometimes different decision making. If we look at companies coming from the West Coast of the United States, the German engineers are always very accurate, and we give products into the markets when they are really superb. And other countries, they are faster when it comes to take it to market. And there we have to speed up, because the world is not waiting. And we are in a strong position, but we have to speed up in order to meet with the competition as well. Some last words on the IAA. I mentioned that if mobility is changing, if the car as part of the mobility has a different role in the future, then the IAA as a traditional auto show has to change as well. And we want the change of the IAA. It should not be a solely auto show anymore. It should be a platform of mobility where also other players are invited. Because one thing for us is clear, and that is maybe also a little bit with the scenarios of Mrs. Werner. If you ask somebody, there is not one solution to mobility. The mobility solutions in China are different to mobility solutions in Europe. The mobility solutions in a small city in Italy are different to the solutions in Berlin, and in Berlin are different to the countryside. And so we have to find answers on the different circumstances we are facing. So mobility is not one or the other, either or. Modern mobility is diversity. Owning and sharing, city and rural, horsepower and body frames, and so on. And so the IAA of the future, which will be located in Munich for the first time in this year, the car is of course in the core of the show, but we also focus on bikes, for example, on motorbikes, on scooters, and so on, because the solutions for the city center are different to the solutions to the countryside. And therefore, everything should be invited to come to the IAA in order to face the problems together. So thank you very much from my side.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kors. Let's quickly change over to Christian Kames. Maybe a little bit of an outsider right now, because we had comments from Mrs. Werner from Volkswagen and from Mr. Kors from the association, and Mr. Kames might have a different point of view about the future of the German car industry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe it just as an intro to my job or what I'm doing. So it includes M&A, but it includes also capital raising. So on the equity, on the debt side, which is an important factor, it has become an even more factor than before. I will share with you a couple of slides that come maybe a little bit more from the outside, as you said, Mr. Menzel, so more from the capital markets perspective, how investors these days look at the auto industry. And if we go to the first slide, I digged out this famous iPhone example with Steve Ballmer on the disruptive technologies, where the established players in the mobile phone industry at the beginning, when the iPhone came out, were all effectively underestimating the potential that this had. And in particular, we're underestimating that the use of the phone would change, and also the business model effectively of the phone. So it was not just to make a phone call, but the things that you could do with it. So obviously Steve Ballmer was wrong. And I think from an investor's perspective, what was said before, they look at the auto industry as one that is in the middle of a disruptive change. I think the German OEMs and suppliers by now also have recognized this. From an outside perspective, it took a while. And the view is that the car industry is catching up, if you will, which means it's not too late, but the car industry in Germany, while it was for decades the innovation leader and basically the one who was leading the industry in innovation and where the car was going, at the moment, the perception is that this, at least for now, is maybe no longer the case. Yeah, so I apologize if it's a little bit black and white, but this is how the markets, at least at the moment, function. If you look at page 2, it was mentioned before, the transformation has, I mean, we were in a transformation before COVID. In the last 12 months, the transformation has accelerated clearly. I will touch on the point of rising investment needs and also what that means. I think the new entrants is a very important topic. So we have players in the auto industry that weren't there 10 years before, and in part with a financial backbone that is unprecedented in the auto industry. And number 5, and that's also important from an external point of view, it was mentioned before, the development from a car company to a mobility company that takes different skill sets to play in this new arena. And companies have to adjust, some better and some are quicker, some are slower. But if you put this all together, the view is that the transformation brings a lot of chances, but it will have a lot of winners, but also losers. And managing all of this is not easy. Yeah, so the landscape of how the car looks like, but also who is a winner in the new era of the car, of mobility, that will change from the past. If you go to the next slide, and it was mentioned before, but in the markets currently, electrification is really seen as the game changer. We have been talking a lot about CASE, so connectivity, automation, shared mobility, and e-mobility. I think in the moment, E is the biggest of these letters. The shared mobility in the context of COVID has, I think, decreased in importance. Let's see where that goes. And also the autonomous driving hype that we saw maybe even 2 years ago, I think the view is that this will be much, much more expensive than originally thought, and probably in terms of a real autonomous car driving on the street, much, much further out than was originally thought. So also there, the focus has decreased somewhat, and really all eyes on e-mobility. And if you look at this chart here that many people are familiar with, from in 10 years, 90% combustion engine to maybe 40%, it's a dramatic change. What is overlooked is that the pure electric car is also, it's growing dramatically, but also the hybrids are maybe have an even more prominent role. And that is one area, for instance, where the German car industry is very strong and maybe is not making enough of it in the capital markets communication, because this is still an interesting place to be. But electrification is the trend. If you look at page 4, you see the change in the industry landscape. We have taken here the OEMs. The bars here reflect the market capitalization of the major auto OEMs. And you could actually, this compares 2011 to today, but you could also take 2019 to today. The picture would look pretty similar. And most striking here is the dramatic increase that the valuation of Tesla as the driver of electrification has taken. It's now 800 billion market cap company, and bigger than the next, probably, I have to count this here, but certainly the next 6 or 7 together. You also see someone like NIO here. It's a Chinese OEM that, frankly, was almost was struggling to get money 2 years ago, and has now reached a valuation that is as high as Daimler and is bigger than BMW. Now, you can say that these valuations are totally crazy because these companies do not sell any cars, and how should that ever be justified compared to the other ones? But it's a reflection of the significant change in the industry that the markets currently foresee. And if it's halfway through what I showed you on the slide before, that the future is indeed in non-combustion engine driven vehicles, directionally, these sort of valuations may actually be true. Not everyone will survive of these new players, but this is a reflection on where it's going, which also means that if you are not exposed to these new technologies, it's getting harder for you to get funding for your investments. And on the flip side, it's easier for the new players to get this access to capital, which they didn't have before. So for the first time now, they have actually money to invest in new models, in new technologies. And while some will fail, some actually will evolve as new competitors to the traditional players. Same is true, by the way, for the auto suppliers, where also a shift in who used to be the leader and who may be the leader of the future is taking place. If you go to the next slide, please. It's an interesting chart because it shows how the, let's say, increasing acceptance of Tesla and also the increasing valuation has led actually to a public market for auto tech and e-mobility firms. The bars here on the right are the new companies that are listed in the stock market that have to do with auto tech and e-mobility. That is effectively a phenomenon of last year. Many of them used the way of the so-called SPAC. So we may talk about this later in the Q&A. So it's a new way to go to the public markets for early stage companies. And again, these companies now have for the first time money to invest in new products, and effectively the stock market is now taking the role of what used to be venture capital about 12 months ago. Next slide. I took down the amount of 40 billion that the German auto industry is investing in R&D. The new players in auto tech and e-mobility, and most of them are actually e-mobility, last year raised 40 billion of equity from public investors, and the traditional OEMs raised 0. Yeah. So this is a massive amount, and we see a similar amount probably being raised this year. And this is definitely a shift in, let's say, competitive dynamics and opportunities that exist that will change the competitive landscape even further. And when I come to my last slide, I believe, is the auto industry in Germany ready or not? I think in general, yes. And from a market perspective, it's also underestimated. But certain things that are taking place, we could be more, and it was said, quicker, more agile, more flexible in making use of things that develop in front of our eyes, and not always come with a reason why it's wrong and why it's maybe not working, but try to have a, let's say, a more open mind of how you can use that to your advantage. Yeah. A very important point in that regard is the access to funding, or a smart way to play the risk return profile of this technological change. We sense that it's not just a phenomenon of the auto industry, but also, let's say, engineering driven companies. It's hard. It's also hard to partner in things that are maybe the future. You rather want to have that by yourself and maybe fund it by yourself. And in some areas of the world, the US, but also China, I think people take a maybe more flexible view, yeah, which, not in all cases, but in some cases may actually be quite smart. Partnerships is the way to go in new technologies. You also see that in other industries, it's impossible to fund this all yourself. Scale, brand power not to be underestimated. I mentioned Tesla. Tesla is not driven by many people because it's such a great car. It's what Tesla transports. Yeah? And I think also there, the German car industry can do a better job in transporting this lifestyle element, or the, let's say, addressing changing consumer behaviors. And the last point, on all these charts, it's a lot is going on. And we also feel that if you try to play in all these areas of new mobility, it's just too much. Yeah. So with all this transformation, you also have to pick your battles and try to rather be good in this one than trying to cater to every potential need. With that, I'll close my intro statement.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kames. I tried to speed up a little bit because we are running a little bit late. I'm turning over to Mrs. Werner. Mrs. Werner, we just heard from Mr. Kames how difficult it is for traditional OEMs, car companies, to get funding. So when you sitting together in the board of management at Volkswagen's headquarters, has it become much more difficult to find decisions, to make decisions because of all this uncertainty? Have you got your own doubts when you decide something together with your colleagues?
Well, yes, I can take an example from Christian Kames. He had a prognosis in one of his slides about the market share of hybrid cars in 2030. But generally speaking, of course, we discuss, is this a hype on hybrid cars only depending on legislation and on bonuses customers get when going into that, and will those bonuses disappear and only battery electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles will be subsidized or get a tax advantage, and will those cars not be in the market maybe in 10 years? Yeah, of course we are discussing that, and you're absolutely right. We have a lot of uncertainties to deal with, and we talk a lot, of course, also about resilience in this factor. Yeah, so how do we have to structure our business to be prepared for those uncertainties that we don't even know yet at the moment? And there was also a question about it in the chat from Professor Stefan Krummacher. He asked, what leadership skills do you need for that? Yeah, of course, resilience to understand dealing with uncertainties is important. And what is as well important is that we have a management team that is accustomed to lifelong learning, that people know that they have to change when the world changes, and that you need far more collaborative leadership skills, to network harder, and to keep up, and everyone has to avoid living in a bubble and hoping that the bubble doesn't blow. We have to look to the left and the right, and have the whole world always in our view. So dynamic resilience and lifelong learning.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Kames, do you think that's enough? Mrs. Werner very much focused on China. Do you see? You didn't mention China. Do you see China as the next big competitor to the Germans?
Well, if I start talking about Africa, of the globe.
I mean, China was mentioned before. Obviously, China is the market that has been growing the most over the past 10 years, and also is the one that this year was the most important one, and where a lot of this was mentioned. Technology is also being pushed, and companies are coming forward that are real companies going forward. And China certainly, we see that also on the M&A side, is more outgoing. Yeah, and also on, in particular, on the technology side, software side, also semiconductor side, batteries. It was mentioned. So a lot of key technologies, and that is the scenario that was put up is one to be taken definitely seriously. No question about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say also, to say something positive also from my side, with regards to Volkswagen, I think most people would agree that it's actually quite remarkable the change that in Volkswagen in particular has taken already to adjust to the change in the industry. Yeah. I think in particular Volkswagen, many people would have said, is maybe more one of the smaller ones to adjust, slower ones to adjust. And it turned out to be that Volkswagen is one of the faster ones to adjust. Yeah? So I think many things there are going in the right direction from the external perspective. So yes, if it's enough, I don't know, but there is many things that seem to be going in the right direction.
I want to stick a little bit more to the Chinese topic, Mr. Kors. Throughout the last, let's say, 20, 30 years, German companies were more or less going to China and investing there. Do you see more and more Chinese companies coming to Germany, to Europe, to sell their cars here? Is something that might, so far it's just a little bit, but do we get an increase, more and more Chinese companies selling their cars here in Europe, in Germany?
Well, companies, if they want to be successful, they go into the markets where they find markets for their products, and therefore the German manufacturers as well as the suppliers went into the Chinese market. It is the biggest market already with 20 million cars, and it's still growing. If you compare that also for the students, I mean, we are talking in Europe, and that is a saturated market. It's not growing anymore. We've got 13, 14 million cars in Europe. We've got around 17 million cars in the United States, but we've got more than 20 million cars already today in China, and it's still growing. And therefore, manufacturers and suppliers have to be in the Chinese market in order to sell their cars there. At the same time, of course, we know that China wants to build up an own industry, own car, strong car industry. And that also leads me a little bit back again to the question of where is, what are the key drivers for the success of electric cars today? And that is not only a pull from the market, but a very strong push from different markets, and that is China. China wants to build up an own car industry, and therefore competing with industries coming from the United States or from Europe with a 100-year history. It is difficult to compete with the combustion engine. Therefore, they go directly or very strong into the electric car. If you want to sell cars in China, you need to have in your portfolio electric cars. And at the same time, in Europe, it is the CO2 regulation. We need to meet the CO2 targets in Europe. This year, 95 grams in average for the European market. That means all cars in the European market are not allowed to have more than 95 grams in average CO2. And to meet these targets today is actually only possible with a battery-driven car and with hybrid cars. But if you look at the climate problem itself, the battery-driven car is not CO2 neutral. I mean, if you have a battery-driven car sold in Poland, for example, where you have coal mining and coal energy, then you have a problem. And therefore, it is always, we need a holistic approach. Yes, but these are actually the key drivers actually for the demand for e-cars and why these cars are coming into the market. And to answer finally your question, are the Chinese coming to Europe? I mean, they have got a strong market also, where they have a strong market, a big market in China. But of course, you realize it already today that some of these manufacturers are entering into the market. We realize it if we look at our IAA, for example. There are Chinese players that want to be part of IAA. That was 10 years ago, for example, that was not really the case. And so they're going more and more abroad and also going into the European market.
Okay. Mr. Kames, I'm just wondering if you agree with my opinion that, and you mentioned it already to a certain extent, electrification is set. There's no doubt about it. It's coming, and you won't stop this particular train anymore. So maybe just the question, who will do it better or worse, electrification? Isn't the topic of digitalization, connectivity, that's the more important question of the next, let's say, 10 years, especially if the German car manufacturers can make it in terms of software, IT, to become as good as Tesla, and maybe as good as Google and Apple as well.
Yes. So yes, I think it's the train has left the station on electrification, but you know, there are there used to be also only one electric car you basically can buy. That was Tesla, and now there will be a lot, yeah, and maybe also with similar qualities or better qualities, yeah, on connectivity too. So I think there's still the potential to to catch up or be on the same footing. I mean, as Tesla is not just electric car, they are also, as you say, have some other interesting features as well. So I would agree, and I think we are still possible to provide alternatives to Tesla.
The Germans could make it?
Yes.
Have you kept this in mind? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still a chance. You're still quite.
I think there's still a chance, yeah. But I also do think that, I mean, it will probably not be decided in 10 years. So it's the years to come now are the decisive ones in this regard. Yeah. But I think I don't think it's too late.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mrs. Werner, we've got many students listening to this discussion. What kind of people do you need in the foreseeable future to survive as a company and to make it? Do you just need IT and software experts? What kind of people do you need in the future?
Well, I truly believe that the specialization that we used to see in our workforce will change. And that means that we will have a shift more and more into dual skills. So for example, take my board division. Probably in 2 years' time, I will need far more lawyers that are also IT experts and that are able to use tools for artificial intelligence, even in legal proceedings. And it's the same in other areas. Because of the digitalization, you need more and more people that have not only specialized in one topic, but can also apply a certain operational knowledge with IT, and this combination, this dual competences will become more and more important.
So let's hope that the listeners from the London School of Economics, that they will provide the right abilities in the future. It's quite late. I would like to move over to the audience and to check the questions. Let me hold on. There's one question for you for Mr. Kames. Do you think that German car manufacturers could become takeover targets in the future, because you mentioned all these financial topics, funding, and so on? What's your opinion?
I mean, in reality, I think that if you look at, let's say, so the answer is rather no, yeah, on the OEMs. If you look at the ownership structures, the size, and also the, let's say, political importance or importance for Germany, I find it hard to believe that that will happen. In particular, if we talk about, the threat from, for instance, China. On the supplier side, I think it's more real, and it's there we are seeing it already. Yeah.
So you mentioned the strong family influence. For instance, at Volkswagen, it's the Porsche Peach family, and BMW the Quants. They will stop that. They will avoid a takeover.
Yeah, I think it would only be possible if they wanted to sell this. We don't see, and therefore it's I think frankly, if you look at many of the European car OEMs, they have pretty secure ownership structures, let alone what let's say the economic importance would be for the respective countries. And I think generally protectionism is also rather on the increase than on the decrease. So while we can speculate around it, I think that risk we see rather remote for OEMs. Yeah. Okay,
it's a question from Adam Cohen from Hochschule Koblenz to all participants. Maybe it's a topic for Mr. Kors in this case. The responsibility for the environment is a very very important topic for the whole industry, but it's very much focusing on CO2 neutrality. Are there other environmental aspects or topics that you have to focus on in the future?
Yes, of course. It's not only CO2. CO2 is probably the issue that is most focused on in the public. I mean, the public is talking about CO2, is talking about climate change, and this is actually a key challenge we are facing, but this is CO2 only. But there are other environmental issues everybody is focusing on. If we talk about, for example, where are the materials are coming from that are put into an e-car, for example. If you look at the value chain, where are all the issues are coming from? Or if we look at the environmental issues faced in mega cities or in cities, like the pollution, and to find solutions for the pollution in these mega cities. And when we talk about pollution, we don't talk about CO2, we talk about other issues. And we are facing these issues, but these are not so much in the public than other issues.
Okay, maybe now a question for Mrs. Werner from Astrid Schilo from London. She's asking, do we need some more, let's say, vertical integration of suppliers and car manufacturers? That Tesla has got an advantage because it's doing many more things by itself.
Well, I would say if you look how many people from the 670,000 employees of Volkswagen work in components, which is, you could say, our in-house supplier, that's 80,000 people. So there is already a lot of vertical integration. At the same time, we have also formed a software company, which will soon have 10 to 11,000 employees. And we are also doing a lot into the education of our IT experts with Faculty 73 and other means. So we know that the skills that we need will not always be available on the market, but that we have to invest in that. But when you look at the challenges that we have at the moment, the OEM cannot do everything. I mean, we cannot buy the cobalt mine on the one hand side and then also build up the charging infrastructure and invest into cars that meet the 95 gram, because obviously combustion engines will be needed for quite some time as long as the infrastructure isn't there, and we get our electricity from coal and wouldn't have an ecological benefit from that. So you can only spend every euro once. So we have to make choices, and we have to make decisions in this regard. And but the vertical integration is certainly one way of overcoming that. But the other way is collaboration. And I think at the moment the trend is going far more into collaboration and finding strategic partnerships. And you can see that everywhere. You know, from the IT partnerships that you have seen recently announced. One goes with Microsoft and the other one with Oracle, etc. And you also see partnerships in terms of research with suppliers and also with companies outside the sector, as you have seen with Linde recently, and so there's a lot going on in the market generally, and collaboration, I think, is key.
Okay, Mr. Kames, you've got your SPACs question from Raymond Wang. And he asked, could we see a SPAC bubble? Is this a sustainable financing option with the likes of Nikola, which many are calling a fraudulent company? What are the risks of the automotive industry from a finance perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think we will see how this develops. I mean, these SPACs, so which are vehicles that are listed and have money, and they buy private companies that then become public. That's at least the principle. And typically, the companies that become part of a SPAC are early stage companies. So most of them don't even have revenues right now, and hopefully have a technology that is a game changer. So these are high risk investments, and many of them will fail. Yeah, this is venture capital through the stock market, and one will have to see, how this asset class develops when also the first ones do fail. On the other hand, some of them will be successful. So I would look at this as venture capital through the stock market. It's currently developing into something that wasn't there before. So about 50% of the equity raised in the US last year was through SPACs. So an enormous number. We have, I think, more than 50 vehicles that want to go public in the first quarter alone. And does it have some taste of a bubble to it? Yes. On the other hand, I would be careful to automatically say this is all bad, because it's effectively venture capital through the stock market. So we'll see. Okay.
Christina Jürgensen from Munich is asking, or maybe it's an industry question for Mr. Kors. How does the industry ensure agility and flexibility in the resource-heavy industry, and taking into account how long decisions take place to change factories, to change the machinery? So is the industry fast enough facing all the challenges of the future?
Well, that is actually what I wanted to mention in my first slides that I've shown, that we think we have got big advantages on our side, but when it comes to speed and agility, we have to speed up. We have to get faster, and the question is how to do that. And Mrs. Werner, she mentioned that for a big company like Volkswagen, with so many factories all over the world, with so many employees, with a history which is not a startup history, but another history, with a culture that were developed over decades. It is very, very difficult to change and to speed up in these kind of companies. And if you compare that, for example, because we were talking about Tesla, I mean, Tesla is still treated also from the perception point of view, like a startup. If they bring products into the market and they don't work at the very beginning, or they have some problems with it or whatever, it is still, everybody looks at it, okay, it's a startup, and they can realize it. But if that happens, for example, to a established manufacturer that has been in the market for decades, these manufacturers, Volkswagen, would probably have a problem on that. And that is the difference. I mean, we have got structural issues, we've got process issues, and we've got cultural issues. And probably Volkswagen, and Mrs. Werner can add a little bit on this, probably Volkswagen has to work on all of this, like all the traditional OEMs, on structure, on processes, and on culture.
Mrs. Werner, what's your answer?
I couldn't agree more. Yes, there's a lot to do, and I mean, we talk a lot about agile structures, and if we want to speed up a project, we try to capsule it and get it a little bit outside our decision-making processes. And you have seen that with the software car company and other areas. So yeah, that is an issue. And another point in that question was also, we have these long-standing contracts. Yes. It is. This is always where also the decision makers in politics come into place, because if you work on a product that has a development cycle of 60 months, 5 years, and then you get a law in place, basically that is valid in 24 months. So in the middle of your development process, and you have done major investments, billions. It's not that easy to do a shift, and therefore it is it is sad, for example, that in Europe we still do not have a legal framework for autonomous driving. Yeah? It is sad that sometimes decisions come more or less suddenly or with a very short time. You have seen that also with the decisions of some countries to not allow new combustion engines by 2030 or 2035. If you develop a new engine, for example, and one must do this for the EU 7 standard, usually it takes 2 cycles of cars to get a return on investment on that. So that would mean if you bring that engine on the market in 3 years' time, and then you want 7 years plus 7 years for amortization, and that is before the cars cannot even be imported into some markets, then of course the question must be allowed whether it really makes sense at the moment to put the EU 7 standard out at all, or just work with the average CO2 fleet emissions. That is yeah, there's a lot of influence from the decision makers in politics and legislation that yeah, that put cuffs around our hands really sometimes.
Mrs. Werner, you've got the one and only question just for you. Diesel, has the German industry overcome the diesel scandal, and did the industry acknowledge all its ethical failings in this regard? From Oliver Lawson.
Yeah, I think we all know that in terms of legal proceedings, 5 years is a short time, yeah, or now it's almost 6 years or 5.5 years. So we are not yet done with putting the diesel scandal behind us. And even more so, I must say, that the diesel scandal will always form part of the history of Volkswagen. We will never, forget it, and we will never put it fully aside. And probably even in 10 years, there will be lessons to be learned from that. But one lesson that we have already learned is that we put ethics and integrity and also transparency into the heart of our strategy. It's one of our fundamental strategic principles. And so we are fully aware that it is not important what we produce, but also how we produce it and how we get acceptance from the society for it. And just, when you look into the Futures of Ethics ebook, which I mentioned in my speech, you see also the Edelman Trust Barometer, which says only 24% of the trust in a company comes from competences, whereas 76% of trust comes from drivers like integrity, dependability, and purpose. So, and that means, yeah, this lesson we have learned, and we will work even further on that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Mr. Kames, it's your turn right now, because financial question again. From Sarat Kumar from Berlin. Do you think the automotive industry's market cap is driven by investors' sentiment? He cites an example, NIO, which was not able to raise money earlier, but now it is a point of focus. Does this mean if the motion reverses, then we might see a slowdown in the electrification revolution?
I mean, certainly investors are driven by sentiment, and maybe there's a little bit too much sentiment in the one direction and then maybe in the future in the other. That is true. I think the direction where this is going, and that there is a focus on who is dealing with the transformation best, I think that is here to stay. Will there be some cycles around it? Yes. And again, there will be also some companies that will fail from these new companies because they are effectively starting. And it was mentioned before, it's not so easy to produce cars in real scale. But that will be part of the game. So not all of these companies we see will be there in 5 years.
Okay. A supplier question also again from Sarah Kumar for Mr. Kors. What would be your 3 important suggestions for the OEMs to develop their local suppliers' capability whose strengths does not lie in digitalization or electrification? So what 3 targets not relating to the new transformation?
Oh, that is, well, I would have answered, of course, going into the transformation process and taking the transformation as an opportunity and not as a threat. But you are talking not about electrification and not about digitization, and therefore what is left is actually left. I mean, future cars also will have materials that are also used today, and therefore I could only say, and that is the key of German suppliers in the world, or what the key of the German suppliers always has been in the world actually is innovation, innovation, innovation. Be innovation leader. And the German hidden champions I was mentioning, in their area, many of these companies have been hidden champions, and to develop them in the future as well as hidden champions. And so it's actually the same principle. Be innovative, take innovations into the market, deliver quality on time, have for the OEMs, have a close relationship also to your suppliers, that you have a long-term relationship and not only a short-term relationship. Maybe this is what I could answer on that.
Okay, and speed.
Speed as well, of course, yeah.
We're slowly approaching our end, but I've got one more question for Mrs. Werner from Ines von Weitershausen. Can you please elaborate on what resilience and lifelong learning for the management team means in concrete terms, and how it compares to the training that other people in the organization get?
Yeah, well, let me start with an example again from our company. If you have to transform a place because the products that are produced there will not be needed in a few years, then lifelong learning might mean that always for 6 weeks you take your workforce out of the production and you give them training, and then they come back and then they still work on the old products, and then they go back again into training sessions, into transformation for their new jobs. And after 1.5 years, when they are fully trained, then you swap them from one set of tasks to new tasks, and that is not so easy for people that are, let's say, in their late 40s or 50s, but they still have to work another 10 to 15 years, and they want to make a living, and so our management has to find the right candidates, to see who is willing to go on that route of transformation, has to identify those people that will most likely succeed in such training programs, who can be also a role model for others in their area that are still afraid to do that. So there's a lot. Maybe on that example for lifelong learning, that less than 5% of the students will probably retire in the same job that they started after the end of their studies. They will have different jobs throughout their career, and that also means for management, for example, that we have more often than not accept disruptive career paths of the employees that we take, and we have to analyze the skills that they have. Not someone who has done for 20 years the same thing, but maybe someone who has proven to be also flexible and change jobs, and will probably do the same in 10 years again when maybe the technology he is coming for is outdated. In terms of resilience, I mean, we could talk an hour just about resilience. Yeah, say resilience is your ability to bounce back. We say it's your ability to bounce forward, to come out of a crisis even stronger than you went into it. And to enable everything that you have, you know, for different cycles in the crisis, to you know, to flatten the curve, that the bump is not going too deep, but then also how you come out, and to analyze upfront what skills might be needed to bounce forward and to make the next steps. I also already talked about not being in a bubble, but networking and building strong links to technology drivers and other regions.
Okay, Mr. Kames, last one and the fast one for you. Leon Feller from Karlsruhe is asking, can you explain the difference in the valuation of Volkswagen Tesla? He says Volkswagen is also very much focused on the future concerning the EVs and so on, but it's getting more or less crazy about Tesla. So what explains the difference being focused on the future in both companies?
And you want a quick answer. I mean, Tesla has the benefit of being just an electric car company, which is in the early stages and is potentially the disruptor with a huge potential upfront. And Volkswagen is a big company with you know, a lot of activities. Part of them are electric vehicles. So I think it's a little bit of an unfair comparison. But do I think that the German car industry is currently underappreciated in the capital markets? Yes.
Okay, maybe this might be a final conclusion. Altogether, let's buy more shares of car companies, of German car companies. I'm not allowed to, but you could do it if you want to. And I'm switching over to the students from the LSE. Thanks a lot and bye.
So thank you, everybody. Especially thank you to all our panelists and to our chair, Mr. Kames, Mr. Kors, Ms. Werner, and you, Mr. Menzel. This was a very, very nice debate. This was very interesting to all of us. Thank you to all our speakers. We hope you enjoyed the event. We hope you will be with us in the days to come. Tomorrow we have a panel on finance. Afterwards, we will welcome the German Federal Minister on Food and Agriculture, Julia Klöckner, and after that, Philipp Amthor, a member of the Bundestag. And there are many more to come in the next few days. So thank you, everybody, and have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.